Okay. Welcome everyone. Is it one? Okay. At our weekly seminar at Jagiellonian. Every meeting seems to be harder than the previous one in terms of technical difficulties. Today we have today we are meeting in the room, which is an extra hassle these days. We have a local speaker, Hoang. Hoang started a postdoc this year with us. You finished a PhD degree at Montpellier, and your main area of research, at least so far, was discharging method.
Yeah, graph coloring,
graph coloring. Okay, specifically with discharging. And today, Hoang is going to tell us about his research prior Krakow, or in parallel to Krakow, or ongoing research.
Ongoing
research on around Barnette's conjecture, right?
Yes.
We are very happy to have you here, Hoang, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Piotr. Right, so today I would like to talk to you about this Barnette's conjecture for directed graphs. So for those who know about Barnette's conjecture, this might seem a bit strange because generalization of this conjecture to a directed setting is not very natural, but we'll get to that in a moment. So this is a part of an ongoing project that I've been working on with Neumann-Lara and Petru-Velikov. And actually during a trip to Bordeaux, along with Marc Lunamy, Stein Kembe, and François Drost, we had some results that I'm going to present to you today. All right, so before getting into the problems, I want to go back to some really basic graph theory. So let's have a little bit of a reminder. So a cubic graph is a graph where every vertex has degree 3. An edge cut is a set of edges whose removal disconnects the graph. So the graph in this example here has an edge cut of size 4. We say that the graph is 3-edge connected if there's no cut of size 2. And actually for cubic graphs, edge connectivity and vertex connectivity is the same. So here, if you want to, you can just say 3 connected. A Hamiltonian cycle is a cycle that goes through every vertex exactly once. A perfect matching is a set of independent edges that covers every vertex in the graph. And for cubic graphs, actually, these two notions are complement to each other. If you remove a Hamiltonian cycle from the graph, then every vertex that remains has degree exactly 1, and that gives you this perfect matching, right? And here you can also see that this perfect matching does not contain a cut, because when you remove it, the graph is connected by this Hamiltonian cycle. So you can always see containing a Hamiltonian cycle as the same as containing a perfect matching without cuts. Now, when I will be talking about coloring, it could be vertex coloring, edge coloring, or even face coloring. And the only thing that I require is that they are proper, meaning that any 2 adjacent vertices, edges, or faces here will have different colors. An independent set is a set of pairwise non-adjacent vertices. So if you take a proper vertex coloring, then every color class induces an independent set. And a bipartite graph is a graph which has a 2 vertex colorings. So in a bipartite graph, you cannot have odd cycles, of course. So this graph is clearly not bipartite. Now, a graph is planar if you have a drawing of this graph without its edges crossing, which is the case for this one. And when you have a planar graph, then there's a notion of a dual graph, which is the graph where you put this vertex, one vertex on each face, and then you connect the adjacent faces. And this is how you obtain the dual graph. And now, when your graph is cubic, then your dual graph must be a triangulation, right? Every face has size exactly 3. And actually, the dual of a simple triangulation is not only cubic, but also 3 connected. So you can try to make a little drawing to see why when your graph is simple, you cannot have it's at an edge cut of size 2. And now a forest is just a graph without cycles. A directed graph is a graph where you can you give directions to the edges. And when you talk about directed graphs, there's also a notion of duality. You just need to know how to orient your edges in the dual. Well, when you have an arc, so an oriented edge like this, there's a notion of left and right, right? There's a left face and the right face. So say in the dual, I can always orient from left to right. So this gives me also an orientation of the edges in the dual. And in the directed setting, there's also a generalization of this notion of forest, right? A forest in an undirected graph is a graph without cycles. So in a directed graph, it will be a graph without directed cycles. Of course, here the underlying graph may contain undirected cycles. And now with this notion of a cyclic set, then you can get to dicoloring, which is a partition of your directed graphs into acyclic sets. All right, so these are the little reminders that I wanted to give before getting into the main subject. So now let's discuss some real problems. So everything began with Tait's conjecture in 1884. This conjecture states that every 3 connected cubic planar graph contains a Hamiltonian cycle. Now, why is this problem interesting? Well, Tait's original motivation was to find actually something that is close to the 4-color conjecture, or the 4-color theorem now, I guess. And actually having this property will imply the 4-color theorem. And how can we do that? Well, take a look at this 3 connected cubic planar graph. It contains the Hamiltonian cycle. Now, if, and then its complement is this perfect matching. Now, if I remove these red edges from the graph and color the interior of this cycle, say blue, that gives me some phase coloring of this graph, right? And now I can do the same by removing the blue edges and color the interior of these cycles, red, let's say. And I can overlap these 2 colorings and say that a phase with both color red and blue will be colored purple. And I'll let you convince yourself that this actually gives us a proper phase coloring of this graph. And we've already seen that the dual of this is actually a planar triangulation. So of course, any subgraph maintains this proper coloring condition, right? So you only need to work on maximal planar graphs, which are triangulations. And this 4 phase coloring of this cubic graphs gives you a 4 vertex coloring of your planar triangulation, right? So white, red, blue, and purple. And well, this implies the 4-color theorem, but unfortunately, this conjecture is false. And the first counterexample is by Tutte, using what we call now a Tutte fragment. And what does this kind of gadget have for like, what nice property does it have? Well, any Hamiltonian cycle needs to go through this top edge. Say I try to make some Hamiltonian cycles that only go through the bottom edges, then I can almost get every vertex, but not all of them. And so actually for it to be a Hamiltonian cycle, it has to use this top edge. And once you have this property, it's pretty easy to see that you can connect these 3 Tutte fragments to these special edges to the same vertex to have a vertex of degree 3 in your Hamiltonian cycle. And this is a contradiction. Right? So there have been many other counterexamples to this conjecture, which are smaller, but I think this is still the easiest one to understand. Okay, and actually I'm interested in kind of this language of perfect matching without cuts. And I will be talking about this a lot today. So we'll be always going back to this language of perfect matching without cuts. And we already seen that containing a Hamiltonian cycle is the same as containing a perfect matching without cuts, right? You just take the complement. So this is an equivalent conjecture to Tait's conjecture. Now let's fast forward a bit in the timeline and go to almost a century later with Barnette's conjecture. Well, what he observed in all of these counterexamples to Tait's conjecture is that the non-bipartiteness, I guess, of this construction seems to be important. So he conjectured that if you add this extra restriction of the graph being bipartite, now then you can always have this Hamiltonian cycle. Right. And this actually is still an open conjecture, and that is why it's the topic of the talk today. And it was proven to be true up to 66 vertices. And it was later announced to be proven for 86 vertices now in 2002. Once again, I'm also interested in this kind of language of perfect matching without cuts. So this is an equivalent version of Barnette's conjecture. Now we will go back to this conjecture in a moment, but before that, I want to talk about another conjecture on Hamiltonicity of cubic graphs, and it's Tutte's own conjecture. Now, he was so convinced that bipartite is really the key and not planarity, that he dropped the planarity restriction and conjectured that bipartiteness sufficed to contain this Hamiltonian cycle. But unfortunately, once again, this is false. And the first counterexample was found by Horton in 82, also using this kind of idea that, oh, a Hamiltonian cycle, you can build a gadget in which a Hamiltonian cycle has to use some special edges. And that is how you can build a counterexample to this conjecture. But I will actually show you something, some construction, which is slightly different. This one is by Ellingham. I guess not the whole graph, but this gadget is by Ellingham. And its property is that any Hamiltonian cycle cannot go through both the red edges at the same time. So it can use at most one of them or none of them, but not both at the same time. So a simple idea here would just be to subdivide these edges, right? Put some vertices on there and then force the Hamiltonian cycle to go through them. But of course, you have to remember that the graph must remain cubic, and then you also must maintain kind of the structure. So the smallest counterexample that we know of was found by Georges in 89, where you can see this idea of the Ellingham fragment, these subdivided edges, and he found a way to make these connections for the graph to be cubic, but not destroy this property of this fragment. And now, of course, once again, I can replace this Hamiltonian cycle with a perfect matching without cuts. Now let's move on to another problem, which is similarly very different from Hamiltonicity in cubic graphs. And this is the dichromatic number of planar digraphs. So this is the problem of finding the minimum number of colors such that I can partition my planar graphs into that many acyclic sets. Yeah. So the first thing that we can say about this is actually partitioning into 3 induced forests, so not even a cyclic set, it's even acyclic in the undirected setting, right? Is actually very easy. And this just uses the phi degeneracy of planar graphs, meaning that every planar graph contains a vertex of degree at most 5, right? So say I only need to work on triangulations, because this, the fact of, well, you take a subgraph of an acyclic set, and then you will still get an acyclic set, right? So I can start with a triangle, which is 3 induced forests of size 1. And then at every step, I consider this vertex of degree at most 5. Now, if each color corresponds to a forest, I have a color that appears at most once in my neighborhood, and I can just repeat it. And this way I can create no cycle in the graph. And this is in the undirected sense. So I really have 3 induced forests very easily. So a natural question would be, oh, can we do this for 2 induced forests? Maybe this question is open, but actually this is impossible because it's equivalent to Tait's conjecture. And I will discuss this equivalence in a moment. So let's just move on with this dichromatic number problem. So this is this case is closed for induced forest, but actually is directed version is still open. So more precisely, Neumann-Lara conjectured in 85 that planar digraphs are 2 dichorable, meaning that I can partition them into 2 acyclic sets. And this is an open conjecture. Well, there have been a lot of partial results. First computational results, it was verified for graphs up to 26 vertices. And then if you have some extra restriction, for example, on the digirth of the graph, the girth is the size of a smallest cycle. The digirth is the size of the smallest directed cycle. So if you have digirth 5, then the conjecture is true, and it was also later improved to digirth 4. So this means that you can still have triangles in your graph. It's just that they are not directed. Now, maybe you would think, okay, maybe the obstruction really comes from the fact that I cannot have a monochromatic triangle on the faces, for example. But actually, this is also not true, because Steiner proved in 2019 that if there is a 2 dicoloring, then you can also have a 2 dicoloring with no monochromatic facial triangle, whether it is directed or not. Okay, and actually the thing with planar graphs, the key feature of planar graphs that is important for this conjecture seems to be the fact that it is K5 minor free, because he also proved in the same paper that this is equivalent to the dichromatic number being at most 2 also for K5 minor free graphs. And actually he gave a counterexample that is K3 minor free, but not K5 minor free, that needs 3 colors. So the fact that, the important feature of planar graphs here is really the fact that it is K5 minor free. All right, so, we like this planar setting because we have this notion of duality that we've seen before, and then we can bring this problem back to kind of cubic graphs, right? So now I will rephrase Neumann-Lara's conjecture in this setting so that you can better see the connection. And first, let's go to this version of the conjecture. So I'm claiming that this is equivalent to saying that every 3 connected cubic planar directed graphs contain this even subgraph, such that after I contract it, the remaining graph is strongly connected. Now, how do you see this? If you take a look at a 2-component, yes.
What do you mean by even subgraph?
Yes, every vertex in your subgraph has an even degree with respect to that subgraph. So you just take a look at 2 components from your acyclic set, yeah. So between 1 component from acyclic set 1 and 1 component from acyclic set 2, and then
mean that it's a collection of cycles.
yes, yes. In the case of cubic graphs, it's just a union of disjoint cycles. So if you take a look at the cut sets between these 2 components, then the corresponding edges in the dual will correspond to these cycles that kind of goes around your components, right? And separate them from each other. And if I remove this cut set from my primal graph, then the phase surrounding it becomes 1, right? So this is equivalent to contracting this cycle in the dual, right? So this is where this contraction of the even subgraph comes from. And now I'm claiming that my dual graph here is strongly connected. Why is that? So my primal graph is now acyclic, right? I've removed every other edge. And there's something about the directed dual is that when you have a directed cycle like this one, then the edges corresponding to this cycle forms a directed cut in the dual. Here, the cut goes always from the component in the interior of the cycle to the components, I guess, on the exterior, right? So if my graph is acyclic, there's no directed cut, so it's still strongly connected. So that concludes the proof of this equivalent version of Neumann-Lara's conjecture. But it is still kind of far away, in some sense, yeah, from my language of perfect matchings with no cuts. But okay, if I take a look at the complement now of this even subgraph, I remember my graph is cubic, so when I remove this, the remaining graph is called an odd subgraph, meaning that every vertex has an odd degree, in this case 1 or 3, right? So I can, and we've already established this fact that it does not contain a directed cut. So here I have something that is almost a perfect matching, but not yet a perfect matching, because my odd subgraph can have vertices of degree 3, of course. And now I'm going to prove that actually I can always kind of transform my instance so that I only need to work on perfect matchings. And how do I do that? This cubic graph, I can kind of blow up every vertex using this gadget. And now I'm saying that I must have some perfect matching without a directed cut. Right? So say if every perfect matching contains a directed cut, then this odd subgraph must also contain a directed cut. Every perfect matching, I guess, in my original graph contains a directed cut. Then when I transform it, then this odd subgraph must also contain a directed cut. So let's try to see why that is the case. Yeah. So the first thing you can see here is that this odd subgraph has to contain either 1 or 3 of these kind of bold edges, just due to a problem of parity. If it contains exactly 2 in this gadget, then it cannot be spanning. Actually, I forgot to mention that. So I've removed a set of edges from a union of disjoint cycles, right? My graph is cubic, so I can never remove every edge from a vertex. So this odd subgraph is spanning, right? Okay, so the fact that it is spanning, so it has to cover either 1 or 3 of these bold edges. And I know that it's not a perfect matching in my original graph, right? So there's some vertex of degree 3, and the corresponding gadget will have these all of these 3 edges in my odd subgraph. And here I'm orienting the gadgets so that you can see V1, V3, and V5 will either be sink or sources. So all the edges go out of them or goes towards them. And that is how I can ensure that, oh, these guys will not have degree 3 in my odd subgraph. And so the only other option is to do this for it to be spanning. And then now I get a contradiction with V7. So this is one way to transform your instance so that you can always bring the problem back to only working with perfect matchings. So only one type of odd subgraph. Okay, so finally, it was a bit tedious, but we can bring this problem of dicoloring actually back to this problem of cubic graphs with this perfect matching without cuts. And I want to talk about one last conjecture, this one by Hochstättler in 2017. And this is kind of something we've already discussed, right? So you have some 3 edge-connected digraphs, and we're interested in contraction of even subgraphs such that the resulting graph is strongly connected. We've kind of already discussed this. Oh, yes, of course. You must have noticed that it is in red, so this should mean that this conjecture is once again false. And the only known counterexample for now is by two of our authors, now in Balikov. And this is a counterexample using kind of this blow up that you already seen, and this framework of perfect matchings without directed cuts. And actually, to get this kind of equivalent version for cubic graphs, then it's not that hard. You can see that one direction is kind of trivial, right? If this is true for all digraphs, then it's true for cubic digraphs. And now you want to once again bring this problem back to cubic graphs. So what you can do is to transform your instance, by blowing up these vertices into these directed cycles where the size is the same as the degree of the vertex. So you can see that every vertex has degree 3, and the fact that it's this directed kind of simulates this fact that you can move around freely on your single vertex, so you can move around on your directed cycle. So this does not break this condition of strongly connected. Anyway, so this gives you once again this equivalent version in this framework of perfect matching without cuts. And now we can all bring everything together to get this diagram of post set of a Boolean lattice of order 3, right? Where you have these 3 different conditions: bipartite, planar, and directed. So and these say something about containing a perfect matching without cuts in your 3 connected cubic graphs. If you only have bipartite, that's Tait's conjecture. You have planar, then that's Tait's conjecture, and if you are directed, that's Hochstättler's conjecture. And all of these are false. And if you combine any 2 of these, actually, so bipartite planar, that's Barnette, planar directed, that's Neumann-Lara, and the last case was conjectured by our own authors, which seems to be very natural now in this context. And all of these problems are open. And even when you combine all 3 of these restrictions, bipartite, planar, and directed, this problem is still open. And this is what we look into, right? Because it seems to be the quote unquote easiest problem if we want to have a positive result. And also, if there is some counterexample to this, then this counterexample is a counterexample to every conjecture that was made in this field. Okay, so now that we are looking at this conjecture, actually, I like to bring it back to dichromatic number. Maybe that's kind of a personal preference, but there's also a reason to it. So we've already kind of seen this equivalent statement between these 2 frameworks, right? Now, if we go back to Neumann-Lara's conjecture, then we've seen that these statements are equivalent. The same for Barnette if you replace acyclic sets by 4s, right? And if you remove also bipartite, then it would be the same as removing this even restriction in the dual, right? So bipartite, every face must have an even size. So when you go to the dual, that will correspond to the degree of the vertices. And now you can see clearly that the equivalent statement is this partitioning of planar graph into 2 4s that we already said was false. And so now let's go back to Barnette's conjecture, which is supposed to be for today's main topic, right? I want to discuss something about these 2 4s thing. Actually, here, if you take an example, this is an even triangulation. It's called an octahedron, a polyhedron with 8 faces. And if you take a decomposition of this thing, then it's actually 2 trees. Now, is this always true? Well, I want to argue that it is, because now, if you take a look at the dual graph, we have already established that the cut sets between these 2 4s is a set of it's a disjoint union of cycles, right? So now you just do some edge counting. You know that in a triangulation you have 3n minus 6 edges. You remove the edges from the cut set, right? So it's just counting the number of faces in a triangulation. So 2n minus 4, there are n minus 2 edges left divided between 2 4s. So each one of them must be maximal. So they are trees actually, right? So I can replace, so I can replace 4s by trees in my equivalent statement. And now the reason why we are looking at even triangulation is because they have a unique free coloring. Now the proof of this is not too hard. There has been a lot of different type of proofs of this over the years. You can try to think about it. The easiest one that I know is just proving that there cannot be a vertex of degree 2 or degree 4 in a minimal counterexample. And that should give you a contradiction because an even triangulation has always minimum degree at least 2 or 4, right? At most 2 or 4, sorry. Yeah. And this 3 coloring gives you some independent sets. And the hope was that we can kind of extend these independent sets into trees. They are not far away from each other. And this is actually backed by this kind of octahedron that you can see here. Any way you can partition this into 2 trees, it will contain a whole class of color from your free coloring. So here, for example, this red tree contains all the red vertices, this blue tree contains all the blue vertices. And this properties comes from kind of this gadget that is the triangle in the middle. So if I can glue this triangle to every face of a graph that has such a property, right, where I can extend my independent set into a tree, then I can obtain another even triangulation that has the same property. So this way, even if you just start with an octahedron like this, you get an infinite family of graphs for which any decomposition into 2 trees has this property that a tree is actually an extension of this independent set. So this is actually a pretty natural question to ask. Can we always extend a color in a 3 coloring of an even triangulation to a tree in a Barnette's decomposition into 2 trees? And this even works in the directed setting because you just need to kind of orient your gadget well to get the same type of property. So once again, yeah, if I orient my edges like this and glue all these triangles in every face of my directed graphs that has this property, then I will once again obtain some infinite families of graphs with this same property. Okay, so now we are really looking to solve this question of extending this maximal independent set into a tree. And for this, you can rephrase this question this way by, if you remove your independent set, then the rest can be partitioned into another independent set and a tree. And these 2 statements are actually equivalent. So if you have a partition into 2 trees, yeah, you remove this maximal independent set, then one of your trees just become another independent set. And then you have another tree, of course. And then the other way around, well, if I have a partition into an independent set and a tree, and then I put my own independent set in, say I have a cycle, yeah, by contradiction, then remember that this is a triangulation. So inside, I must have some vertex that is not from my independent set, so it must be from my other tree. And now this contradicts the fact that it is a tree, right, not a forest. And in this equivalent version, then you can also relax it for to get the directed setting. You just need to maintain the connectivity, yeah, of your tree, which became an acyclic set. So you can also ask, if I remove this independent set, can I partition the rest into an independent set and a connected acyclic set? Well, this version is kind of in the middle of Barnette's and Neumann-Lara's conjecture. It's because when I put my old independent set in, then I will get a tree and then a connected acyclic set. Yeah. Not two trees, not two acyclic set, but something in the middle. So also there's the more natural relaxation of this question to just two acyclic sets, and at least one of them is some extension of my independent set from the three coloring. Okay, and for this relaxed question, we actually have some answers to it. And maybe, yes, before getting to what we actually prove, let us see why kind of removing the independent set is an interesting operation to do for this type of graph. You already know that when you remove an independent set, well, the resulting graph must be oriented, planar, but don't forget that we come from an even triangulation. So removing a class of colors means that there's a natural bipartition of the remaining graphs. So this is also bipartite. And actually, in an even triangulation, every edge is part of some simple cycles. So which became a face in this resulting graph. So this is also two edge connected. But unfortunately, this is only true for if you add another restriction on top of it, which is subcubic, meaning maximum degree at most 3. So this is the result that we proved in Bordeaux. And we actually also found a counterexample to this with maximum degree 4. So this really answers this relaxed question, right? Well, it does not mean that the original question is false yet, but we also managed to build a counterexample to that recently using the counterexample to this theorem. So I will not actually show you the proof of this theorem, which uses the discharging method. Is a bit on the less elegant side, I guess. So I will show you another side result, which is, I guess, kind of close to this one. So if I have a 2 vertex connected graph with tree width at most 2, so this is my extra condition, then I can partition it into this independent set and a tree. And this is actually very simple using year decompositions. So every graph with tree width at most 2 actually has what we call a tree year decomposition. So what's a year decomposition? So you can partition your graph into these ears. Yeah, you start with a cycle, and then you at each step you can glue an ear onto it, which is this path, where the endpoints of my path will be some previous year. And the tree part here is a restriction on the fact that it has both endpoints has to be on the same ear. And since I have 2 vertex connected, I cannot have some different case like this. Yeah, so the endpoints must be different vertices. So I have something that looks more like this, and it actually gives you this tree-like structure if you consider each ear as a vertex of this auxiliary graph, right? And now once you have this, then it's actually pretty easy to choose some independent set here that makes it into a tree, right? I just kind of do this by induction, and then for each year I will choose a well-chosen vertex, yeah, to disconnect the graph. I mean, these cycles, yeah. And that is the proof to this side result, I guess. And now I want to show you actually the counterexample, which I find much more interesting. And this is the counterexample to our theorem, which has a maximum degree 4. Yeah, you can see some vertices with degree 4 here. And what is happening here? There's a kind of a C4 in the middle, and you cannot have 2 vertices of the C4 in your independent set, because
for example, to what? To planar, bipartite?
2 edge connected,
Okay.
yeah, oriented,
Okay.
an independent set connected acyclic set. That's a handful of things. And yeah, you cannot have something like this because your acyclic sets must be connected, right? So there's at most one of these guys in the independent set, and you know that on the other side you have these two vertices in your acyclic set. So now I'm just going to look at the left side of this counterexample because it is symmetric. So there's a directed C4 on the left, actually. So one of the two vertices, either the top one or the bottom one, must be in your independent set. We'll say the top one. Yeah, let's do some case analysis. Their neighbors must be in the acyclic set. Yeah. And now, if you take a look at this middle vertex, it cannot be in the acyclic set because there's a C4 running, directed C4 running through it. And it cannot be in the independent set because your acyclic set must be connected. Yeah. And then for the other case, yeah, there's also some case analysis, which is pretty straightforward also. And you can say the same thing about this new vertex. Yeah. So this is a counterexample that shows that our positive result is actually tight. And now recently we managed to actually use this counterexample to build kind of a, so this is formally what it shows. Yeah, this is a graph oriented planar bipartite, two edge connected, maximum degree 4, and this also has degree 3, I guess. And it cannot be partitioned into an independent set and a connected acyclic set. So we took this as a gadget. We fill in the faces to obtain our even triangulations. Yeah, to come back to this original question. Here's just all the edges in the triangulation. I did not show you all the orientation, but we orient this in some good way. We also glue okay, so this is the 3 coloring of your even triangulation. And we also glue kind of another version of this gadget inside itself. And by doing this, what we obtain is that for some good orientation of this gadget, you have the following property. So if you your acyclic set contains this red edge, for example, then it cannot contain all of the red vertices of your even triangulation, and the same for the blue edge. So we kind of have this edge coloring, which says that, okay, my acyclic set cannot contain an edge of every color, right? And once you have this gadget, then you just glue it inside an octahedron. And what you see here is that I have an edge coloring of my octahedron with 3 directed C4, one of each color. Yeah, can you see the directed C4? Yeah, each color forms a directed C4, right? So it means that, well, my acyclic set must contain some edge, yeah, from each of these directed C4, and so it cannot contain all of the vertices of that color. And this shows that this is a counterexample to the most relaxed version of this question, which is, can I extend my independent set into some acyclic set, yeah, in this 2 acyclic set decomposition of my even triangulation. So this kind of closes also this question that we asked. The hope was actually that maybe we can combine these 2 ideas in a certain way and build something that must contain every vertex of the same color, but also cannot, which would be a contradiction, meaning this will be a counterexample to everything we said before. But we haven't managed to do that, and we don't think that it is actually possible, but maybe someone else can come up with a good idea starting from this. And yeah, so this is formally what it proves. There exists an even triangulation, yeah? So you cannot partition it into 2 acyclic sets such that one of them contains every vertex from an independent set of your 3 coloring. And this talk is more, I guess, to bring your attention to kind of this problem, which combines all of these conjecture under the same context, right? And then you can choose whichever language you prefer to work on. Yes, I prefer dichromatic number, but you can also work on Hamiltonicity or perfect matching with flat cuts in cubic graphs. And I think this is an interesting problem to get into, at least this case that combines all three of these restrictions, right? If you find a counterexample, that would be groundbreaking. And if you have a positive result here, then it would also be a step towards solving this long-standing open conjecture. So that's everything that I would like to talk about today. Thank you all for coming and listening.